While the left continues to showcase its fangs against the Second Amendment rights of the everyday American, Donald Trump and the Republican Party gain the upper hand in the media. As they scream in agony for guns to be taken out of the hands of reliable and loyal citizens, people are actually screaming in pain and agony as their friends, family, and loved ones pass away before their very eyes. They could send relief. They could visit themselves. But instead, the left would rather do moral grandstanding on the bodies of the yet buried to push their unpopular gun control agenda. Hello, and welcome back to Sensical Politics, where common sense meets politics. I'm your co-host, Jeremy Holt, and I'm joined by
Spencer Sembrat, as well as
Adam McDonald.
And we've got a lot on the list tonight. First off, right off the bat, we have the Las Vegas shooting, the awful tragedy that happened a couple days ago, where biggest shooting in American history. As well as we're going to talk about gun control, what we can do to keep this from happening again. We're also going to be talking about the new abortion law that was passed in the House, I believe, today, which limits when you can get abortions in the country. We're also going to be talking about California becoming a sanctuary state today and what that means for the current state of, illegal immigrants and how the country is going to react to that. We're also going to talk about Representative Tim Murphy from Pennsylvania, I believe, being involved in a interesting conversation with his mistress. And finally, we're going to talk about the Iran deal and whether President Trump is going to undo President Obama's Iran deal and what's coming for that. Right off the bat, we just got to address the Las Vegas shooting. I feel like this is happening all the time. I'm almost always waking up and I see, more people were killed. And honestly, from a conservative perspective, it's easy for me to walk around and yell like, oh no, Second Amendment rights, all that stuff, which I'm still for. But it's also frustrating because I don't really know of a solution to this, especially whenever the shooter bought, not all, but some of these guns legally, and whenever the modifications that you can put on semi-automatic weapons make it an automatic weapon. So I'm not really sure what solutions I can add to the conversation because obviously I want to protect the Second Amendment rights, but I also don't want to have the chance of 59 people being shot down at a concert. Is that kind of a chance we have to take with freedom of preservation, or is there anything else we can do? Jeremy, what's your take on this?
It's certainly, first of all, prayers, and my heart goes out to all the individuals who are affected by this, whether tangentially some family, friend members, or somebody who who actually passed away or has been affected. I'm deeply sorry, but this is an issue that, first of all, we have to wait a little bit. People like to get caught up in politics right after something happens, but this is the state of politics that we're in right now, where we're going to get so high on emotions and then we're going to go out and pass policy. That's not something that's healthy. A lot of people say you shouldn't rush relationships because of, certain emotions that you feel, because you might not feel them later on. All the emotions that America's going through right now are something that you might regret. That's how a lot of people feel about, say, like the Patriot Act right after 9/11, how that has severely limited our individual freedom, how we are now being spied on by our government. Not something that's ideal in a constitutional republic. And that's the sort of same thing with gun control, is we can't really rush into this. And to offer solutions requires time on this matter, and I'm not sure that there is many solutions. The NRA is suggesting that we look into the sort of modifications that are made to these weapons, but I don't think that is going to help. This whole shooting showcases why gun control really doesn't work, because some of these weapons are not something that people can typically get. You can't actually purchase an automatic weapon. And while these modifications, these bump stocks, were approved by the Obama administration, they might, even banning them might not even help, because evil people will always get their hands on something if they really, really want to cause this much chaos. And judging by some of the news articles going around right now, this guy might have been planning to do other attacks, providing he wasn't caught on this one with explosives and such. So I personally have no solution, and I'm not quite sure there is one. So I'm interested to see what Tyler has to say.
Well, my main take on it is, so if you look at this specific scenario, right, where this guy who, didn't really have any sort of like background information about him, where nothing about him really would have hinted that he may have done something like this, at least as far as I know, according to his family and his friends. And so my main point here is that what could we have done as a country to stop him, other than the fact of repealing all guns? What could we have done to stop him? Right? He was just someone who I don't know exactly what happened, but he just went from someone who had no signs of this sort of thing happening to doing it. So unless somehow we manage to create like a test that can somehow see into the future and know whether or not you're going to randomly shoot people, like psychologically, I don't think there was any way to evaluate this person to figure out whether or not he was going to shoot people. So the only way to stop him from doing this would to literally be to ban every gun in the world, or to ban every gun in America, like a total gun buyback like in Australia. And even then, I mean, you could still buy guns illegally. And so I don't know how much gun control really could have affected this guy. I mean, yes, you can use this situation to talk about gun control, because it could lead to other measures that may have not helped this solution, but might have helped other problems with gun control. But I don't see any law besides literally taking away everyone's guns that would have stopped this person from doing this. And I remember I was reading an Onion article the other day, like the day after it happened, and they were pretty much mocking America, where it was like, oh, the only place where gun violence happens is saying that there's nothing we can do about this gun violence. And I feel like that's a little bit like disingenuous in the fact of where, yes, other countries may not have as much gun violence as us, but we're obviously a different country than a lot of them. And I know, like, per capita, we also have some of the higher ones. But if you look at also like other crime rates, like if you look at, like, okay, for example, if you compare America, where you've got your hot robberies, which are when the suspect is robbing the house when the people are home, and then you've got like cold robberies, and hot robberies are much more dangerous, as you could tell, right? Because the person who's being robbed is actually at home, and then so they're in much more danger. They're much more common outside of America, due to the fact that homeowners are able to protect themselves with guns. So my main point here is I don't think there was anything legislatively wise that we could have done to prevent this, and I think it's just a fact of just that we need to like look at our society and our culture and say, like, what could drive a person to do this, and that's my main take on it.
Well, Rolling Stones released an article today saying that evil doesn't kill people, guns kill people. Obviously, saying that guns need to be taken away because they kill people. Which, I mean, obviously that's kind of a dumb headline, but that kind of brings up, like, obviously guns don't shoot on their own. But if we completely removed guns from existence, do you think people would still be killed?
See, there's another interesting and much broader question that you could ask from this. Can we remove all danger from people's lives, or much more accessible, can we remove nukes from this world? All right, we can't even do that. We certainly couldn't even manage to remove guns from America. There are more firearms in America than there are Americans in America. So I would find very serious difficulty of a buyback program working, especially with gun culture in America. And that's the sort of question that we actually need to be looking at, is gun culture. And how can we make it so that way people are responsible and aren't really compelled to commit violence so easily whenever we're talking about the other kinds of small mass shootings that happen in this country every day, when robberies happen or somebody ends up getting shot for whatever reason. Those kinds of things can be prevented if we can look into our gun culture as well as our mental health in America and figure this stuff out. Because Canada has actually sort of similar gun laws to what we have here, but they have a much smaller rate of actual homicides happening in regards to guns because of how their gun culture is. So
Well,
that,
that also kind of has to.
I was
Oh,
just
go
going to
ahead.
end it saying so that's really the question that we need to be looking at is how can we prevent the smaller ones because the bigger ones are always like they're going to be shocking, but sadly we can't do anything besides train our first responders to be as best as they can be.
There are smaller ones aside from these huge, the big breaking ones, especially in like inner cities and stuff. But also, that kind of asks the question. I always kind of wonder this because some people have different opinions. Do you think the Second Amendment was created ultimately for protection of oneself from each other, from one's own government, from like if the government gets out of control or whatever, they can defend themselves from the government, or do you think it was both? Tyler, what do you think?
Well, I'll give my opinion on that, but I just want to tell this one quick little story that I heard about. I don't. It wasn't specifically in reference to gun control, but it was reference to like violence in general that I thought was rather funny, and I think it kind of applies to the situation. So the story goes that there's this wizard living in this ancient, faraway land, and the king is looking at his people, and he's realizing that the rates of crime are pretty high, and that people are killing each other with swords, knives, and the like. And so he comes to the wizard and he asks them. He asks the wizard and he says, "Wizard, can you do something about this problem with the knives and the swords? Can you take away people's weapons?" So the wizard casts a spell, and now there are no longer any swords and knives, and so people stop killing each other, and for a week everything is good. And then, the week later, someone gets mad at another person and picks up a tree branch and kills another person with it, and everyone goes back to fighting again. And the king approaches the wizard again and says, can you please do something about them fighting with the trees and the rocks?" And so the wizard casts a spell, and now all the trees and the rocks are gone. And then, so then a week goes by, and okay, people stop fighting. And then after the week is gone, people start killing each other with their fists and strangling each other. So the king approaches the wizard once again, and so pretty much like the whole moral of the story is that humans will always find a way to kill each other, through by any means necessary. And so it's kind of like when you take away one thing,
Wouldn't people argue that
not
you're taking away the gun because the gun can do it in a larger amount than like a sword?
Well, so people may argue that, but I mean, the point is that you can still kill the same amount of people with a sword as a gun. It just might take longer, but you can still do it. I mean,
Yeah.
do you see what I'm saying? Like, for example, the thing is that a sword gives so much more strength to the person able to wield it. So, for example, like strong people are just made that much stronger, while weak people aren't made that much weaker. But a gun, anyone who's trained using a gun can pretty much use it. So even the weakest and the strongest people are all put on the same level. So, I mean, I've always heard it. Yeah, I've always heard education and guns are the great equalizers of the world. And so, I mean, in all honesty, there are like stories where you'll hear people who they'll try to use pepper spray to stop an assault, and it won't work because there are certain drugs and there's certain hormones that can get someone so hyped up on adrenaline and different things like that. And so the pepper spray doesn't actually work on them, and the only way to actually stop them is to actually use a gun. And so it kind of comes down to the fact of where I don't think we should take all these things away because clearly they aren't always bad. And I mean, if you look at the statistics, I believe there are like 2 to 3 million people every year that are saved by guns, like their lives are saved by guns. And again, it is kind of like hard to calculate a number like that because it's, you can't really say how many gun shootings didn't happen because someone else had the threat of a gun to deter violence. So we won't really ever truly know, but I would like to believe that it's higher than what is estimated by, I mean, even the estimates are like 1 to 2 million. So I could see it does save
Right.
it does save more lives,
way
more
more
lives
than
than it
it's-
kills.
Yeah. Exactly. All right. Well, we can move on to the next issue. Jeremy, I think you knew a little bit about this, or Tyler, you might, about the new abortion law that was passed in the House. I
Yeah,
think,
so the
today.
House of Representatives at our federal government has managed to pass quite overwhelmingly. I mean, like there were still dissenting votes, obviously, but they were able to pass this new law that could potentially actually be written into law if it passes the Senate, which is the next big question, about abortion, which effectively bans abortion past the 20-week mark, which is quite substantial. And the broader implications of this is not only are we getting closer and closer in our laws, but also culturally towards a bigger pro-life push, finally, is that if leftists want to complain about this and challenge the government, this can potentially be a case in a sort of a year or two that can make it to the Supreme Court and could dump Roe v. Wade in the trash. That is one of the bigger implications of this, is that if a law is indeed passed, somebody will challenge it. You know that's going to happen, and when that challenge happens, then we might finally be able to get all branches of our government to agree on one thing, and that is to finally end the tragic deaths that happen every year across this country of the unborn.
Okay. So, wait. So it was passed. Does that just in the
Yes,
House? Right?
how you know how laws work. They have to pass the House, they have to pass the Senate, and then the president
Yeah.
signs.
So it's in the
Yeah,
Senate.
well, it will be whenever it gets brought up on the Senate's docket.
Oh, okay. So I mean, it's not really. It's not there yet.
It's definitely a very big step towards
To pass it.
a pro-life law and, like I said, eventually possibly a pro-life government.
Do you think we're eventually going to make abortion illegal?
It's definitely it's definitely a possibility. I'm witnessing more and more and more that especially women are much more adamant about pro-life than ever before, and it's especially apparent because I am on a sort of moderate college campus, and the amount of people who are in the conservative organizations on campus, the college Republicans, Turning Point, and such, is staggering. They actually overwhelm the amount of people who are in college Democrats and are in leftist organizations on campus now. So that's just from the freshman class. So it's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as people enter the voting pool, that we have more people who are sort of religiously conservative, not in the sense that they, don't like gay people or against those types of things. It's that the pro-life generation is actually this one. And the culture has always been sort of slanted towards pro-life, but it's becoming predominantly pro-life, I believe. Which,
How do you think that happened?
um,
Sorry, I don't mean to interview. I'm just curious.
I think it's because of a backlash towards the culture that these individuals grew up in, our generation grew up in, and the people below us, because they grew up mostly at the end of the Bush era and Obama era. So it's sort of this cultural time where religion was cast aside as being something that nobody should care about. And it's definitely being brought back because the younger generation always sort of rebels against the common culture. And if the common culture was one that was sort of a-religious, atheist even, you're going to find people who are going to find more solace in religion than ever. And it's proven in the numbers that our generation is, in fact, way more religious than even the much older generation, even Gen X, going back to that.
Well, okay, so that's definitely one idea. It's kind of like revolting against their parents. But there's this one interesting. I think it's a some psychologist was talking about it, and it kind of makes sense, right? So if you split up the country into people who believe that abortions should be legal and are willing to commit it, and then you split it up into people who are not willing to commit abortions and also think that it's murder, well, clearly the people who believe that abortions are okay are going to have less children than the people who believe that abortions are. This is just pretty much the whole idea, is that the people who are having abortions are killing their offspring, who are more inclined to believe the same beliefs as the people who have similar genes as them and who also are brought up by them. So in a way, abortion will eventually become illegal because the people who believe that it should be illegal are having the kids who will have similar genes to them and will have similar, at least for the most part, ideas. And I know that they do revolt, but eventually they do come back. Or I shouldn't say eventually, but like majority of the time. And so, just statistically speaking, over a long period of time, you can see these believers in abortions, like, in a way, ending their own ideology because they're just killing the people who would continue to believe in them because they believe that it's okay. And I just think I can't remember the effect. There's like some effect that it's talked about in psychology. I think it's psychology, but I can't remember what it's called. I have to look it up.
So I have a question then. Does that mean that once the pro-life movement succeeds, is that eventually they will be overthrown because then all of these people who are pro-life will then be forced to have more children who will then grow up believing that?
Rebel?
I think since once it becomes illegal, though, there'll still be like contraceptives, and usually religious people are more or less inclined to use contraceptives, which still results in them having more kids, especially if abortion is illegal. So I think it may. I mean, yes, you're possibly right in the sense of where it might swing back because of that, but you could also argue that since people who are more accustomed to abortions are still more lenient when it comes to other forms of birth control, and they're sometimes more educated about it, then they're also going to wind up having less kids. I mean, the higher education, just statistically speaking, the higher your education, the less likely you are to have kids.
Yeah. I think also what the pro-life generation now should also focus on is really emphasizing things like contraceptives, condoms, birth control, and spermicide, anything that really works that isn't abortion, because that's how we end this sort of travesty all in all. So that way people get what they want, as in if they don't want children, they don't have to have children. And then, there aren't people suffering.
Right,
yeah, and something isn't actually dying. Which is what everyone wants. And another thing we'd have to do, which would actually help that cause, is by making birth control more accessible. Hold on. Can we pause it for like a real quick second?
Yeah, I can cut it. Yeah, go ahead. You have to do something.
One of my roommates just came in. Sorry, he was just grabbing food. Okay, so I was in the middle of something birth control.
You said making...
Yeah, so one of the ways that we could make birth control more available is by ending Planned Parenthood's monopoly, so to speak, because they are everywhere and the government is funding them. And that is a bad scenario, as we've talked about before, in regards to monopolies, is that they only form with government help, and Planned Parenthood gets a lot. So what we should do is we should tell the government, hey, get out of the healthcare business like you should be doing, and then we will actually have competition, which will allow the prices of birth control and contraceptions to fall, to make it more widely available, although I don't see why people can't just use condoms, because they are cheap.
And they are probably the most effective. Or not the most, but for its worth, it's effective.
By the way, so yes, I agree with what you guys are saying, but go back one second. I looked it up. It's called the Roe effect. I couldn't remember what it's called. And so, according to Wikipedia, the Roe effect is a hypothesis about the long-term effect of abortion on the political balance of the United States, which suggests that since supporters of abortion rights cause the erosion of their own political base, the practice of abortion will eventually lead to the restriction or legalization of abortion. So you can do some more
It's an
research on
actual
that. But
thing.
yeah, it's very interesting, and it was coined by I guess it's someone of the Wall Street Journal. So I was incorrect about it being a psychology thing. I feel like I've heard a psychologist mention it, but that may have just been my imagination.
So, not to get into the whole healthcare debate, but don't some people advocate that contraception isn't readily available and it needs to be a right almost
It would be
for
very
free?
readily available if the government wasn't subsidizing a company that could monopolize on it. That's the whole thing. Is that they're like, Planned Parenthood's so
True.
good. Yeah, isn't that great? Whenever you can only buy that kind of stuff from Planned Parenthood.
Right, and aren't they the people that are against monopolies?
Yeah, and not only that, but um, also if we got government out of healthcare in the sense that we didn't have health insurance getting way deep into that stuff too, that would also be a great thing. But again, the government gets tangled up, and instead of solving the problem with less government, people are just like, yeah, well, let's guarantee this as a quote right, because that's something we can do.
Yeah.
And it's totally fair, right? Because none of us guys will ever be able to use birth control in our lives.
Well, you can.
Some people are not good with women, like our friend Tyler.
No. What? No, I mean you can as in you can take birth control if you want. Make use of your right.
Yeah.
Enshrined in the Constitution.
The Constitution of America.
I believe it was
Yeah, it
Jefferson,
was.
right?
But if we're going to talk about abortion, we can at least jump quickly to the topic of Representative Tim Murphy. So
Okay,
Representative
yeah.
Tim Murphy is the guy who represents my district in Pennsylvania. He's all right, I guess. I've never really liked him from the standpoint like he just doesn't return anybody's calls on anything ever. Like even whenever he was just a lowly guy in the state. But he is now retiring immediately, effective immediately, actually. He's not going to wait till the end of the term in 2018 because of a little scandal that he's been involved in. So he has sent texts. People have intercepted these texts that he sent to his mistress, his lover, um, urging her to receive an abortion because I guess somebody made a mistake along the way and now that woman is pregnant. Or I think the story goes that she thought she was pregnant and Murphy was like, you have to get an abortion. I can't let this happen. So another
And now everyone's getting mad at him because he's supposedly
life.
or he preaches pro-life, but then whenever it comes down to his issues, he
Yeah,
kind
so
of
it,
flip-flops.
it brings up the question, and I'm sure Tyler can give some insight into is, well, if we were in this situation, and I know hypotheticals are kind of stupid, if any of us were in this situation where we are all pro-life, yes, but you got a girl pregnant, what do you do? If this was a completely unplanned, something ridiculous happened, there was like a hole in the condom. She said she took birth control, but like something happened, it was expired or something, or she lied. What is your plan of action? And I kind of want to hear what Tyler has to say. Or not.
Sorry, that's a tough question. Sorry, I was thinking about it.
Oh, that's fine.
So in
Well,
my
Tyler, if you want to think,
Yeah, I think Spencer might have a response. You can give your
Spencer,
response.
go ahead. I'll think.
Okay, well, obviously it's really hard to put yourself in that position, but the closest I think I've been to that position is whenever something pretty much exactly what happened, what Jeremy just used as a hypothetical happened to my friend. and we were sitting in the hot tub one night. It was like 11:30, and he got a text from his girlfriend like she like missed everything, and it was getting kind of late in like the cycle and everything. So my friend starts freaking out. He wants her to go like get a test done, but she's like out of town at her mom's house, and she can't like drive there at night and stuff like that. So he's freaking out, and he was sitting on the ground like on the floor like texting her. We're like talking, and he's like, "Oh, like if like you get an abortion like right off the bat, like it's not killing anything, right?" And I'm like sitting there. I'm like, I'm not gonna make a decision for you, but I think you know the answer to that, inferring that yeah, you are killing, you know, a baby. But I was thinking to myself like, oh, what would I do? And I mean, I hope that I would say that, tell my girlfriend or whatever, it would be wrong to have an abortion, and I would stand by that. I wouldn't use any of those cop outs of, oh, it's your decision or anything, because if I saw someone point a gun at someone's head, I would do everything in my position to stop them from pulling the trigger. So why is it different with my baby at that? So I think that I would advocate against an abortion, but obviously it might be completely different, and I might not be thinking straight whenever it actually happens, but I think that's the closest I've ever come to it, so I would advocate against it, as hard as that would be.
Yeah, what would be your course of action afterwards? Would you advocate for adoption? Would you say, you know what, we got to deal with this and start planning, setting aside money, figuring out a new future?
Well, right, so I, like, having kids isn't even really in my plan. Not that I don't want to, but I've never really, that hasn't really been a primary goal of mine. So I don't think I would probably go for adoption. But I mean, things change when you actually see that baby that's yours, and maybe something will change. But before it was born, or before the baby was born, I would advocate for adoption, because I don't think I would be able to take care of it. But it would also come down to what the mom would want and all that stuff. But yeah, that's
all right. Does Tyler, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I think the only thing I can really say is that I would like to believe that I would not be a proponent of getting an abortion, especially because that would make me one of like the biggest hypocrites on earth, and I only try not to be hypocritical. And I mean, obviously that's not the main reason why. The main reason why is because it would be murder, and I'm not a proponent of murder. And so I think probably my steps of action would to look into the different options. So, you know, adoption, or you know, possibly letting my family just take care of the kid as though it's like theirs, and then, you know, when I'm all set, then maybe like adopting him back or something, or him or her back. I don't know. It would be. What's so funny about that, Spencer?
That just
How is
funny.
that funny?
No. I mean, I'm not laughing at yours. I'm just laughing at like the scenario of you handing your parents a kid, going off and doing your own thing. The kid's like 18 years old now.
I don't mean 18. I mean like, okay, what? I would probably need like 5-6 years to get fully on my feet, especially if I was like rushing because I had a kid. So I don't know. He'd probably be like 5 or 6, and then I could. I could take him. Yeah, and so, you know, I'd have to start planning, but I do like to plan. So I would like to believe that, you know, number one, it's like 0% chance going to happen anyway. But number two, if it did happen, then I would like to believe that I would not get an abortion. But again, that's just me saying that right now. But I believe that I would have the strength and the, I don't know what the right word is, the willpower and like the moral duty to not get an abortion. Obviously there are like certain exceptions where, you know, like if the mother is going to like die or something, then I think there can be exceptions made.
Well,
but you know, in a normal sense, then I think that it would. I would like to believe that I would not. What about you, Jeremy?
I have nothing to really add to that in sort of sense. You know, like I'd like to believe I would be brave enough, but obviously none of us ever know what we're going to do whenever emotions get high, and especially
Right.
if whomever your partner in that sense is, they might have other stronger convictions that you can't really keep control of, because unless you're going to keep her in a cage, you can't really determine where she goes.
Right.
And at that point, it's really like, well, I made my choice and she made hers.
Right. Like I think that's what some people mean when they say it's like ultimately the woman's decision, as in the sense of it's in her body. So if she like you said, unless you keep her in a cage, then you technically can have a say, but you ultimately can't do anything. So I guess it does come down to her, but I think she would value your
You,
opinion
you would
if you
certainly
did do it.
hope, otherwise that's a relationship doomed to fail. Certainly.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so on yeah,
All
on
right.
the
Well, that's a
docket elsewhere, on a topic far and beyond abortion, California has, I guess, decided, whether legislatively or executively, that it is going to be a sanctuary state, meaning that it is now going to apply all the rules that a sanctuary city does to itself, to the entire, I guess, Commonwealth or whatever they call it, of California, meaning that California will no longer honor federal sort of calls to apprehend individuals who they believe are illegal aliens, as well as not allowing detainments longer than those individuals are set for if they get caught in any sort of like, regular crime.
Yeah, and I'm looking now. I believe it was. It's what's it called? It's not an executive order for the governor, but it wasn't passed legislatively. The governor Jerry Brown just just signed the law
You
today.
mean sign the order, or was it a law?
Let's see. California flexed it. This is according to sfgate.com, so San Francisco Gate.com. California flexed its political muscle Thursday, beefing up protections for undocumented immigrants under a controversial law signed by Governor Jerry Brown. So I believe Brown signed a bill to create a statewide sanctuary
Well, if he
city
signed a
policy.
bill as in a law, then that might have passed the legislative House and Senate, which would not
Okay,
surprise
yeah.
me, actually. But yeah, we got to make sure we get
Right,
that
no, no,
right.
no. It's California. Yeah, so don't quote us on that, but I'm trying to see. I mean, I guess obviously it passed through the House and the Senate of
Yeah,
California.
just good to make that distinction. But the important thing
Okay, well,
is,
anyway,
what
just,
what does
yeah.
this all have to do with us and immigration policy? There's large amounts of debates between everyone on the political side, all political sides, on, is immigration a good thing? Is illegal immigration a good thing? And how do we sort of struggle with this as a nation? So, Tyler, what is your perspective?
Okay, so in my personal opinion, I think, I mean, obviously, I am all for states' rights, right? I think the states should have any power that is not deemed by the Constitution to the federal government. But I do believe that the federal government should have the ability to regulate its population in the fact of who is coming in and out of the country, right? Because the states make up the country, and I think other states should have a say on who. So, for example, like, eastern states should have a say on who is entering the country via the northern states or the southern states, right? Because we're all part of the same country, so it all affects us. And so I know it's not exactly what you were asking, but I did kind of want to address that point where, as I've said many times, I am all for states' rights, and I think take away federal government's power. But I do think this is one of the places where the federal government should be able to have some sort of control, at least if not control, at least more control than what the states are, than what California is currently letting the government have. And I feel like when you kind of step in and take this kind of sort of big like middle finger to the rest of the nation, the nation that elected Trump, that elected the president who said he was going to build a wall to keep illegal immigrants out, and in this one state, without the approval of any other state in the country, says, hey, all these people who committed a crime to get into our country and all these people who aren't documented, they are now in our state. We are not going to listen to the federal. We're not going to listen to any of the other states on what you think you should do about this. And so, I don't really think that's a good sign when it comes to unity. And so that's kind of like my general take on it. Is I feel like California is kind of giving like a big middle finger to the rest of the nation. And what kind of annoys me is that there's like this whole idea that like California should secede, and like Californians or certain Californians, certain liberals are like sometimes they're like, oh I love if California were to secede, and then like if like then they also make jokes about like Texas seceding, and I don't know, it's kind of just like I feel like sometimes they can be hypocritical where they'll point out how different California is from like the rest of the country, and they'll say that's like necessarily a good thing, and then how different Texas is from the rest of the country, and they'll point that out as a bad thing. And so I feel like sometimes this could also lead to a bit of hypocrisy and a lack of unity. So that's my general take on it.
Yeah, also Thomas Hoffman said he's the acting director for ICE, which is like the deportation government agency, said that by passing this bill, California politicians have chosen to prioritize politics over public safety, which is I kind of agree with, because if there's criminals and stuff, according to the law, it can ignore people who are charged with drunk driving, people who assault police officers, serial thieves, animal abusers, and gang members cannot be looked at for deportation or anything because of this law, which is true because I don't have the stats right in front of me, but even if it's one person, if one American citizen is harmed by an illegal immigrant being protected by the state's legislator, I think that's one too many. And I think that as what's the word, as Americanized, as nationalized as it sounds, I think that American citizens' rights are more important than an illegal immigrant's rights, or even just immigrants' rights. If they want the same rights as an American citizen, then they should follow the procedures. And I hear the argument all the time, oh, it takes too long, it's too hard, all this stuff. But even if that's true, which I'm not necessarily disagreeing with it takes too long, we should be talking about how we speed that process up, not how we bypass that entire process and give protection to these potential criminals. Not all of them, of course, as never it's all of them. Just like all gun owners don't shoot up a country festival, but there are people that are harming U.S. citizens, and I think that is wrong to protect.
Yeah, Tyler brought up a very, very interesting point. It's on the point of constitutionality, on the ability of our federal government to regulate its borders, which is actually a very, very, very good question, because the Constitution actually says nothing about this. Because America effectively had open borders up until the late 1800s, I believe, or the early 1900s. You could come into the country. You could come into the country even if you like flew in from space and just landed in the middle of the country. You would be an American citizen. Like, not even a joke, because that's just how it was way back in the day. Whenever there was no such infrastructure where a government could be able to hold data on all people who are and are not part of the country, nor did they have any interest in it, because up until then, we were sort of filling out a nation. We didn't even have our full borders up until the end of the 1800s. So, but it still is a very big gaping hole in constitutionality of whose actual power is it? Because if you're going to go by how the Constitution says, any power that it does not strictly delegate to the federal government, it delegates to the states, or it delegates to individuals. So it does beg the question of how do we solve that constitutionality, and how do we cope with the sort of assertion that, well, now we have localities who say that they are the authority on immigration, and we have now states saying that they are the authority on immigration, and the federal government has for a long time said it is the authority on immigration, setting population controls percentages for certain areas of the world. So that from that standpoint, not really saying anything about sanctuary cities, but from that standpoint, there has to be some kind of amendment or some kind of Supreme Court case that truly sets the boundaries to who gets to say what on immigration, because we can all talk about, and I will agree that the federal government is the one who is meant to regulate the borders for the nation. But until we actually fill that out, we shouldn't be able to have this discussion on immigration, because it's technically not within the realm of discussion at all. Like healthcare shouldn't be, but it is anyways. But
yeah. Are you saying because it's not in the Constitution?
yeah, any power that is not delegated explicitly to the federal government is delegated to the states or localities or individuals. Mm-hmm. Unless, in a lot of the cases, the federal government sort of usurps that power, as it has continuously done, because it sets its own precedent. So, like, government has been able, the federal government has been able to say stuff on welfare for a long time because it's the one that controls a lot of the welfare state now. That sort of thing. Whereas the Constitution says nothing about the government's ability to be able to do that. There was once, a long time ago, an amendment passed saying that the government can now collect income tax. It's sort of that kind of thing. We should have amendments saying, well, the government is allowed to do this now, rather than just saying, well, we kind of need this, so let's just go with it.
So we're gonna...
Because the only way a constitutional republic can work is if the government is delegated explicitly what it is supposed to do. Otherwise, you will eventually be led into tyranny. Just walked into it democratically. Because at this point, we aren't even a constitutional republic. We're just a democracy. Like, the Constitution is just a document that the judiciary sometimes talks about at this point. Everyone's trotting over all of our Bill of Rights and the rights explicitly stated afterwards in the amendments and the rest of the Constitution.
All right. Well, we're at the end of the time limit right now. I think that's a good spot to end it with the constitutional rights, something to think about. Tyler, any last words from you?
Not much. I mean, just that I would kind of say that even though these topics may have seemed sort of not connected, I don't know, I kind of like how, since we ended on the Constitution, all the topics that you kind of talked about today can all be brought back to the Constitution, and then where are these powers relegated? And I kind of just like seeing it all come together in the end. But I know we didn't really cover the specific topics, but I do like how it eventually all does tie itself together.
Yeah. All right, Jeremy.
Nothing other than that I am now confirmed to be going to Turning Point Student Action Summit in West Palm Beach. So anybody that is coming will be able to see all of us, me, Tyler, and Spencer, in all of our loving glory. I will be the better looking one. Spencer's going to be probably the taller one, and Tyler's going to be the nerdy one. But hey, it is what it is. So...
The perfect team, the perfect.
Oh yeah, we're like the 80s.
Well, actually, we'll need Alex for that.
Oh yeah, like the 90s.
Tyler would be the nerdy guy. Jeremy will be the good-looking guy. Spencer will be the tall guy, and Alex will be the black guy.
Yep, just the 4 traits of all human beings.
And on that note,
you're either nerdy, tall, good-looking, or black. You cannot have both. You cannot have 2. You cannot have 3. Only
and
choose
on that note.
On that note, we will talk to you guys next week. Hopefully, no more people are dead, but we'll see. We'll talk to you guys later.